Hello, White Sox fans, and welcome into Sox on Tap Live. I am Jonnie Nani, finally back on the air, and I've got NWI Steve with me. We got a special guest, Dan Szymborski of FanGraphs today. Steve, start off with you. How you doing, man?
Hey, yo, Johnny. Doing well. Always good to talk a little bit of White Sox, and we are a mere 6 days away from an actual baseball game being played live on our televisions.
Yeah, I can't wait, Steve. The winter is long, off season is long. It sucks. And one of the things that start signaling that baseball's around the corner is projections. And I think we have the perfect guest on to talk about this. So welcome to the show, Dan Szymborski. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing today?
Oh, good. We're glad you took some time to talk with us and discuss a little bit about what we're going to see from the White Sox this season. So how's the offseason been for you?
Well, we seem to have a fairly normal offseason. Yeah, nobody actually signs anybody in November or December or January anymore. But it looks like we're going to start the season kind of normally, which is nice because everybody likes to stay employed. So I have no real complaint that I'm allowed to make, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's awesome. I like just seeing spring training in action, seeing videos, pictures, hearing the crack of the bat, slap of the mitt once again. So all good things coming up here. But Steve, go ahead and lead it in. Let's get into some Zips projections here.
All right, awesome. So, we were talking offline before we started here, and we said there's really 3 guarantees in life: death, taxes, and White Sox fans being mad about preseason projections. Fortunately, this year, I don't think that Sox fans in general are as mad at the Zips projections, which had the team winning 87 games, finishing in second place to the Minnesota Twins here, a mere game behind the Twins, which I think is pretty in line with what a lot of people really believe, that this is a pretty close race between these two teams here. So, Dan, really the first question, and that I'd like to get from you here is, how is Zips formulated? What type of data inputs are you utilizing to come up with the projections that your system ultimately does?
Well, first, just to clear something up, the FanGraphs projections are a Steamer Zips combined projection, and it's done with a slightly different methodology. I actually have Zips right now actually has the White Sox even better than that. Still slightly behind the Twins, but they have the Twins at 92 wins, White Sox at 91 wins, which is, even better, better wild card odds. But to move on from that, Zips essentially, it's a computer projection system. So it uses career data, most heavily the most recent data. Zips attempts to compare players to large cohorts of similar types of players in history. It establishes a baseline. And it uses things like StatCast data and some of the newer stuff that we have available now to try to get kind of a read of where a player is. And once you combine that with the data from the cohort of similar players, you kind of get like projecting a hurricane. You get kind of that cone of ignorance coming out. I mean, projecting the future is really inaccurate when you're talking about like mean projections. I think when you look at a projection for from a percentile standpoint, Zips last year had Luis Robert as, the 10th percentile projection was like 1 WAR, and the 90th percentile projection was like 5.5 WAR. So there's a pretty big, just array of possibilities. But, the idea is kind of just to peer through the fog and kind of get a better idea about what's going to happen. Because even if you explicitly make a projection system or not, you are, in some level making a projection. Whenever you say you like player X on a team more than player Y, on some level you're making a projection. So I just think of this as kind of trying to do it in a more systematic, objective way to get us a starting point to argue and get mad about things.
And that it certainly does. So just to clear things up, you don't hate the White Sox, and the Zips projection model doesn't hate the White Sox, correct?
Well, I'm told I hate every team. So I guess I hate the White Sox and I hate, everyone else too. So as long as I'm hating everybody, I think everyone's happy with me.
Fair enough. It is, I think, kind of interesting because I believe that there is a segment of baseball fans in general that believe any projection system, whether it's Zips, Steamer, Pacoda, that it is individuals utilizing and inputting their bias in some way to ultimately come to these projections and trying to kind of explain that and help educate people on it is a little bit of a daunting task at times here. So just kind of having the primer from you and explaining, as far as how Zips goes about reaching its conclusions is certainly pretty helpful from that standpoint. A follow-up question that I had, obviously 2020 data is going to be a little bit interesting in the sense that we had a very truncated season and we had individuals that were dealing with COVID-related issues. Not everyone responded from the virus that had it similarly. And you had individuals opting out for the season. And how does Zips kind of take into account those types of things, like an absence from a guy like a Michael Kopech or from someone like a Yoan Moncada that had COVID-19 and saw a significant decrease in his performance from where it was in 2019?
Well, I think, to be perfectly blunt, before I give the more detailed explanation, poorly. I think there's just a reality about that we're dealing, because projections deal with baseball history. Everything we know about baseball, comes from baseball history. We don't have, experimental data about baseball history. You can't put a player through a season a million times in real life and see what happens. It's you can't physically do that, and the players would be very upset about that. So when you have a situation like the COVID-19 season in 2020, hopefully that's the COVID-19 season, you're dealing with something that we haven't actually seen in baseball before. We can make some guesses because there have been seasons that have been interrupted by strikes. You have, instances where players miss seasons for non-injury things or non-severe injuries. But you're kind of having to do some extrapolation and some guesswork. So Zips, for a guy who just opts out of the season, Zips is considering it just like kind of a normal season off, so to speak. I hate to use that term. It's just call it a term of art for the purposes here. But COVID injuries, that's really tricky. Zips does take into account different kinds of injuries on a general level, but I'm not really sure how to treat COVID. Because the doctors don't really have long-term consequences from COVID, so I certainly don't, because I'm not an epidemiologist. I can never pronounce that, so hopefully someone will forgive me for that. So there is some guesswork involved, more than usual, and I kind of the consolation is that everyone else who does projections kind of has the same problem I do. So misery loves company.
Absolutely. Jonnie, you got a couple of questions for Dan here?
Yeah. So, I mean, Yoan Moncada is trending up in 2019. And then you see, like last year, COVID symptoms are affecting him all season. I just wonder. Sorry if I cut out a little bit there. It was Moncada. He's trending up big time in 2019. And then season like last year happens and it's a down year due to COVID affecting him all year. Dan, I didn't know, I know probably some of the guesswork that goes into that. But if you could explain a little bit for like a specific case like that for White Sox fans here.
That is the trickiest problem, because a player who misses a month from COVID-19, you can kind of, say, hey, it was an injury. Let's just try to treat it as that. It's really hard to evaluate a player playing through an injury because you don't exactly know how they feel on any given day. And even people are fairly poor judges of how exactly they're doing and feeling. There's a guy who feels great and is underperforming, or someone who thinks that they're failing and isn't. It's kind of hard to evaluate exactly what the consequences of that are from a production standpoint. So Zips could very well be underrating Moncada going into the season. It doesn't hate Moncada. I mean, it has him as a 3-win player. That's not on 2019's level, but it's better than he has been in before that. And I don't really think that the question of how much to take into account is really a great question for a projection system to answer. The thing about tools is you want to use tools for things that tools are good at. And for a situation like this specifically, I don't think projection systems themselves are a very good tool for that aspect of predicting Moncada's future. So there is a possibility that he's being underrated going into the season.
All right, good to know. Steve, I know we had some, one thing that you can do with those is some plug and place. So hit Dan with the scenario that we've all been waiting to kind of get addressed. Let's get to it.
Okay, so maybe the most hot button issue in the realm of White Sox Twitter in the last probably 6 weeks since the acquisition of Liam Hendriks has been the question of whether or not the team really needed to allocate the funds in the manner that they did towards Liam Hendriks and then towards Adam Eaton and bringing back Carlos Rodon. There's a sizable portion of the fan base that loved Alex Colomé because he had a tremendous save percentage and he did some things very well for the team here in his 2 years. The question is, would the Sox have been better suited just bringing back Alex Colomé at a lower salary than Liam Hendriks and then reallocating the funds to, say, the starting rotation for someone like a Jose Quintana and then plugging in a right fielder like a Robbie Grossman? How would that have impacted the White Sox Zips projections?
I think what it comes down to is, I like Hendriks a lot, but I think that kind of the extra bat that's missing is kind of the larger problem. I would have liked. I was a big advocate for the White Sox going after Nelson Cruz because, as I was arguing at the start of the offseason, is not only does Cruz fill a need, he also causes the Twins to have a need, and you don't usually get kind of that direct when you're talking about a free agent, because it always seemed likely that the Twins were going to aggressively re-sign or attempt to re-sign Cruz. So you get an extra bit of value if you deny the Twins that ability to have Cruz as their DH. And I was very disappointed because he didn't require like a 4-year contract. It's really hard to have a poor 1-year deal. It's nearly impossible at some level to have a 1-year deal that really damages your franchise in any meaningful way. And I like Colomé, but I mean, it isn't really about Colomé, so to speak. I prefer Hendriks by a significant margin over Colomé, but just the ability to add another bat that isn't Eaton, that isn't someone who's in the organization, I think that was just an opportunity that was missed by the team.
So, I mean, in that scenario, had they been able to say use those funds to bring in Nelson Cruz, and then plug in, Colomé in the back end, would there have been a 2 or 3 win variance in what Zips had projected the Sox win total to be?
With Cruz, there would have been. I think you'd be looking. I experimented this at the time of the signing, and it kind of changed the 1-game deficit to a 2-game edge, which is pretty important in a close race. I mean, don't get me wrong. In a race like this, the projections, the White Sox are absolutely in it. We don't have the kind of faith in projections. The error bars are massive, so a game or 2 isn't that big a deal. But you'd rather be the guy with slightly more projected wins than slightly fewer projected wins. But there's a lot of permutations you could do. I thought Robbie Grossman was interesting. I think one thing that probably is good for a Sox player is for the configuration of a park. It does give a better advantage to a home run hitter than someone who gets their value otherwise, because you're talking about a fairly neutral park overall. That's also a home run park. So I think that kind of plays to Cruz's strengths a little more than, say, Robbie Grossman. But Grossman did have a fun season, and he actually was a little unlucky in the BABIP portion. So he might actually be pretty solid for the Tigers. But I think there were other ways that they could have done this.
Jonnie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's all interesting stuff, and I think just from a sheer wanting him off the Twins standpoint, obviously it makes sense with creating a need for them and then filling a hole for the White Sox. I really like how you put that, Dan. But as I'm looking over this blog that was hosted on FanGraphs, no Lynn in this mix. So can you just tell me what that kind of adds to the White Sox value wise here?
I'm sorry, I lost you. Can you repeat the question?
Just looking at the one that's posted on FanGraphs, the White Sox specific blog, not seeing Lance Lynn in here. So can you just elaborate a little bit on what he adds value wise to the pitching staff?
Oh, Lance Lynn. I love Lance Lynn, and I love what the White Sox have done with the pitching staff. It's a lot deeper than it has been in past years. And I think people have missed that Lance Lynn has arguably turned a corner. And he also did pretty well in Texas too, and that's obviously they've had a park change, but he fared pretty well the year before with the home runs. That's important for a player in Chicago. I know that the projections for Dallas Keuchel liked him in Chicago because he did demonstrate, if you looked at his exit velocity stats against, that he could be not suffer as much as the average pitcher from a home run standpoint, and that could have a benefit. Obviously, he allowed very few home runs. You didn't expect to allow that few, but Lynn's a great addition, and it wasn't really. I like Dane Dunning, but I think the thing is the White Sox are now in the, they're in the divisional hunt, and I think it's more of a win now thing, and you have to give up something to get Lance Lynn.
Yeah, definitely. I like the addition just from the sheer innings that it'll eat for us, but interesting to hear on the value front and how it views them in the specific ballpark. Not something that I'd really consider too much until you bring something like that up. I was just kind of going a little bit more general too. Anyone's like that, that maybe a ballpark affects their value, how you might not think of it in a regular terms until you look at the projections like that. Anyone league wide, doesn't have to be White Sox specific or anything, Dan, that may be putting themselves in a worse situation this year or significantly improved situation.
Usually it's something that you see in the margins and not a gigantic thing. But I think in a case like this with a very specifically configured park, I think you see that. I think the Rockies kind of lose out on this a lot because I don't think that the team actually realizes that it's a batting average park as much as a home run park, and that there's a real advantage to getting ball and play guys when you're at Coors Field. I'm not quite sure that they actually realize that. Not that I'd be surprised if they didn't realize that. And the Orioles had a similar kind of situation with the White Sox in that Camden Yards for a long time was a fairly neutral park that was also a decent home run park. And you saw the Orioles do that a lot over the 2000s where they had a lot of, and they still are actually. They have a lot of kind of guys who have interesting power, but not much. Otherwise, you saw kind of those guys kind of filter in and out last year. Santander and Dwight Smith, and I guess before he stunk, Chris Davis was kind of that kind of guy. But I do think that you can kind of squeeze these things out, and it's kind of hard to see at times, and there's not always a great opportunity.
No, that's really good information to have there, Dan, and some really good perspective kind of looking at it as a whole across the entire league there. Bringing it back to White Sox specifically here. So, and looking at some of the individual Zips projections that are out there, Zips kind of sees Tim Anderson taking a little bit of a step back here in 2021. It has been a slash line at 291, 318, 475. So certainly not the gaudy numbers that he has put up in 2019 and 2020. What do you think it is about Tim Anderson's offensive profile specifically? Is it just his over aggressiveness that ultimately a system like Zips isn't necessarily going to believe in long term?
It's hard to say because the thing is, I mean, you look at his batting average and balls in play, and Zips believes that a little more every year. You'll find that Zips actually projects him now to be up to a 346 batting average and balls in play for 2021. That's up from I think 330 last year, and it was 320 something the year before. It's hard when a player is doing something so different because it's hard to maintain that long term, and we still haven't really seen if he can do that. Zips is saying, hey, there's a chance it's going to be higher than normal, but 350 and 400 are very different numbers when you talk about batting average. One of the things is that one of the things about calibration is you try to find whether it's Zips or any projection system is systematically underrating or overrating players with a particular skill set. And you look at players that are similar to Anderson, and there's no actual tendency for Zips to either overrate them or underrate them. I wish there were, because these kinds of calibration issues are kind of low-hanging fruit, so to speak. I mean, there's still a chance that Zips is underrating him, but I think it's Zips and reality are slowly kind of going to confer at some place, because Zips is at the point now where it thinks he's a really good player. I don't think there's a question about that. It's just he needs more than 170 games at a 390 batting average and balls in play to really buy in that it's that level of in play ability.
Good to know. Switching over on the pitching side. You mentioned a little bit about the Lance Lynn addition and really liking that for the squad overall. Zips really loves Lucas Giolito here going into 2021. You have him at 5.1 wins above replacement. Touched on Dallas Keuchel briefly at the 2.7 wins above replacement. After that, and after Lance Lynn, there's a significant drop off. When you look at the likes of Dylan Cease, Ronaldo Lopez, Carlos Rodon, Michael Kopech, and the Garrett Crochets of the world, there's a sizable drop in anticipated production from the rest of the pitching staff. What do you think it is that, that group of pitchers ultimately needs to do in order to really overcome and outperform the projections that you have in place for them?
Well, I think the problem with Kopech right now at this point is uncertainty. It's been a while now since he's had a full healthy season of playing baseball. And that's a pretty big deal for a young pitcher, especially a pitcher who is still kind of raw in a lot of ways. And Kopech, along with Tanner Scott, is one of two pitchers in the Zips who have had a noted bimodal distribution of their results. And for people that aren't quite familiar with what I'm getting at, what it means is that Zips, unlike seeing them as variants of the nice normal little bell curve, it sees a very high chance that Kopech is a superstar, a very strong chance that he's a complete bust, and the chances that he's just a normal average pitcher as kind of much reduced compared to the average pitcher. He's a very boomer bust type talent. And when you take a guy like that, and he hasn't pitched against major league hitters since 2018, that's kind of a problem. So I think that, the projections for him aren't great, but that just reflects that we don't know. In Cease's case, I mean, Zips is not particularly negative on him. One of the things is he did have a FIP last year of well over 6. He had trouble, putting away batters. When you see, a strikeout rate drop by 1/3 in a season, that's kind of a concern. And his stuff should be striking out more guys than it is. I mean, you have a guy who throws 97, 98, and he's striking out, under 7 batters a game. There's something going on there. Now, Zips actually does project a pretty good bump up in his strikeout rate, which will bring that FIP down. It's not predicting a FIP over 6. It's projecting, I just opened it up, a FIP of just over 4.5, which is pretty good considering it's a 5.71, nearly 6 for his career in the majors so far. So I think that's perfectly serviceable for a fourth starter. It's essentially projecting Cease to be a league average starter. And, from someone who's at the back of your rotation, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good situation. You look at the FanGraphs depth charts as a whole. I mean, the White Sox right now in their starting pitching, they rank 4th or 5th. Sorry, the Mets bumped over them, but they're in a strong place. And one of the things that does help the White Sox, especially the way Zips does, is there is depth behind their desired starting 5. I like Ronaldo Lopez a lot more as like the 6th or 7th or 8th guy you call up than someone who starts the year as your 4th guy, because pitchers are going to get injured, pitchers are going to underperform, and all of a sudden the guy who's your preseason 4th guy is your number 2 guy, and you really don't want that.
And that's really interesting to hear you say that, because in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 days here, the White Sox Twitter has really just been up in arms by a segment of the fan base and the population just insistent that this team has no depth whatsoever, whether it's on the pitching side or even on the positional side here. So to actually hear you kind of put it in that context is refreshing in one regard, and certainly a little bit contrarian to a lot of the narrative that is out there right now surrounding this team.
I would be worried more about it on the offensive side. I think I like Andrew Vaughn, let's just say, but I'm not really sure about their plan for him to be possibly plan A. I think that's really, really risky for a team that's a contender. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Nelson Cruz earlier, who did not require a 5-year contract. A terrific prospect, but also a terrific prospect who hasn't played above high A ball in actual, baseball games, and didn't really hit with power so far in a very limited sample size in the majors. I mean, in the minors, but you'd be a lot happier if he had hit 15 home runs in the minors and in a cup of coffee down there rather than 6 home runs. So there are some depth concerns with the offense, but I am more confident about the depth for the rotation.
And I think that's completely fair. And I know on this show in particular, Jonnie and I, as well as Tony and Buzz, are two cohorts here. We've all kind of taken the position that having a reliance on Andrew Vaughn as the opening day DH, again, for the reasons you cited, for a guy that's had like 120 plate appearances in high A ball. So, we're not talking about a guy that does have an extensive track record. And for a team that is coming out and directly saying that the goal in 2021 is to win the World Series, I've always found that to be a little bit problematic and really putting, I think, some undue pressure on a guy who just simply isn't as seasoned against high-level pitching here to expect him to just come up right away and start mashing on a team that's saying that it's World Series or bust.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is, let's say that they signed a DH to a 1-year deal, and the DH works out. The existing players have no have no problems. Andrew Vaughn destroys the minors. That's not actually a problem. No team has ever had a problem of too many talented players. Creative teams figure out how to work in talented players. Creative teams figure out how to make trades to take advantage of when they have, a surplus of players in a position that can contribute. I look at the Padres and Cronenworth. They had the opportunity to sign Kim, even knowing Cronenworth is good at second base, but they are saying, this isn't actually a problem for us. We'll still find ways to play Cronenworth and everybody. And I think that the White Sox should have treated Vaughn in a way, the way the Brewers treated Hiura, who they knew he was advancing through the minors steadily, but they didn't necessarily just start the season with him at the position. They let him make it. They let him bash his way into the majors, essentially, pushing guys out of the way, push Travis Shaw out of the way and making it a non-problem. No, if Andrew Vaughn is awesome in the minors and AA this year and then AAA, it's not an issue for the White Sox. Nobody has ever suffered from too much talent. And I think that you would have kept, the downside of the team from being less, because risk is the friend of a rebuilding team, but it's not the friend of a contending team.
That is pretty spot on there.
I think you are preaching to the choir here, because.
Oh, go ahead, Jonnie.
Oh, I was just going to say, feels like you're speaking to the choir here. I mean, it's there's no. I don't think there's any doubt that Andrew Vaughn eventually is going to rake at the major league level, but it was just the certainty, and you don't want that risk as a contending team. So Steve, I had a question about bullpen, but if you had something more on the hitting, go for it.
No, go right ahead, Jonnie.
Yeah, Dan, this can be just you watching as a baseball fan or from a Zips perspective. I think it kind of took at least even White Sox fans by storm a little bit last year, how effective guys like Cody Hoyer, Matt Foster, and Garrett Crochet were coming up. What kind of impact do you think they'll have going forward this year? And then, does it add so much value to where it's a scale tipper, or is it going to be more minor contributions, or is there regression in the future? I just wanted your thoughts in general on any of those guys, because some names that maybe weren't as expected to be those as big of contributors as they were last year, but they ended up doing so. So I just wanted your thoughts on that in general.
Well, Zips isn't really high on Matt Foster in particular. Zips does right now, if you rank them, Zips does have the White Sox as the number 3 bullpen in baseball. So at least the projections are pretty high on them. I mean, having Hendricks at the front of your bullpen is really, really good. So even if I'm saying, I'd prefer a DH, I mean, that's not because I don't think Hendricks is good. I think he's terrific, and I'm super excited about it. I like the bullpen, and I think that they've done a good job building a bullpen on the cheap. They didn't go the Rockies way of, signing endless free agents to fill out the bullpen, because if you're going to go after relievers and you're not getting a deal, go after someone like Hendricks. Don't go after kind of like the second tier. I think that's where you get burned, and the White Sox have avoided that. I have pretty much no worries or significant worries about either the rotation or the bullpen for the White Sox. My concerns are really just kind of I think they needed one more bat, and they could use a little more depth in the offense. I'm pretty positive about the team. I think only the Yankees are probably clearly better from a stand than if you look at the tier above. I think only the Yankees really stand above them in the American League. But the Yankees have downside of their own. You look at their pitching staff; they have some depth concerns of their own. If they lost Cole to something, and they could, that the wheels could come off very, very quickly if a couple coins flip the wrong direction. So I'm pretty happy with where White Sox are, and that includes the bullpen.
Yeah, you answered that perfectly from the Zips projection standpoint, but I just want to get your feeling as a baseball fan. How awesome is it watching Garrett Crochet throw smoke immediately after being drafted? I
am a little disappointed that we never got kind of the Burr Hamilton bullpen. I really wanted that. It just felt so nerdy and fun. I know they played around with that, but it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, that's definitely one that I know history nerds like myself were definitely pining for, but alas, it's just not meant to be.
Yeah, so I'm rooting for the Nationals to kind of pick up both of them and make it happen. It's like, you're in Washington. I mean, your bullpen's probably going to stink anyway. Have some fun with it. Have them fight the presidential mascots or something.
Now, look, that in itself right there would be worth the price of admission right there. One last bullpen question there. So there's been a little bit of discussion in the last, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 days, about the possibility of the Sox potentially using the 5th starter spot to do some piggybacking with guys like Carlos Rodon, Michael Kopech, Garrett Crochet, and kind of structuring the games in a way to limit the innings for all those guys involved, because they all have injury histories as well as some innings limitations this year. If the Sox were to do that in the early phases of the season using piggybacks or openers in that number 5 spot, what kind of impact do you think that would have on the team and their ability to win games here early on?
I don't think it would have a major impact, but I think it could be smart tactically, because what the White Sox have is they have some of those guys with questions, and you're going to have them on the roster. And this, it makes sure that they're not having, just endless 1-inning appearances, because long relief to an extent is kind of dead in baseball. So I do like that idea. And it goes back to Lance Lynn. One of the reasons he's so valuable is because the White Sox have a lot of interesting players who, are injury risks or aren't, up to the point where you can have them throw 6 or 7 innings a game. I mean, the Astros showed that very well in the playoffs the last few years, that beyond, first Cole and then Verlander, that, they have some guys who can really throw hard for 4 or 5 innings who you may not want to see for 6 or 7 or 8 at this point. So if they're creative, I'm all for it. I'm not really sure how well Tony La Russa will manage that, because it's hard to manage against how you've managed in your career, and you didn't really see starting pitchers used in that kind of way. Maybe I'm being too judgmental. Maybe he's fine with kind of learning a new trick at this point. So that would be my one question, I think. Otherwise, I think it's a good idea.
Anything else, Johnny, on your end?
Yeah, that's all I had on bullpen wise. So not too much other than that.
All right, Dan, the last question that I had for you here, and again, we really appreciate your time here tonight. Say it's late July and the Sox are, say, in first place by a game over the Twins when the deadline is here. And right field still is a little bit of a black hole. Adam Eaton is either hurt or underperforming, and Andrew Vaughn just simply isn't coming up and lighting the world on fire at the DH spot there. Which of those 2 positions right there do you think the team would need to address first and foremost here to cap off a division title?
I think I think might be best to consider it one problem because you do have some flexibility. I know that certain guys don't really want to DH, but I think for a stretch run as a kind of a opportunity to get another bat in the lineup, I think that kind of thing will go over a lot better. I think really it depends on who's available. It's hard to, say exactly where the exact need will be and who will be willing to trade that exact need. There's a lot of moving parts there. I think that the White Sox, if the opportunity arises, they should be opportunistic in this way. I think that's important as you go into a stretch run, but it's really hard to get too specific because I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities out there. I mean, what if, Chris Davis, the non-Orioles one, is having a big season and you can pick him up for, say, a third tier, your number 14 prospect or something. I think that's really, really interesting. But we have to really see what happens at the deadline.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah, that's the tough part about projecting this stuff. You talk about that with your models and stuff, but just where teams are going to be. Don't know exactly. So, Steve, I didn't have too much else. I just want to say thanks to Dan for jumping on and talking. If you got a final one, rattle it off, and we can let Dan be on his way, and we'll finish out with our standard reads here.
No. Again, Dan, thank you very much for hopping on with us here again, talking about the Zips projection system here, how it relates specifically to the White Sox. And this has been fun as always. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yep. Have a good night, Dan.
Have a good one.
Do the same.
All right. And thank you once again. That was Dan Szymborski from FanGraphs, running down some White Sox Zips projections, some other stuff around baseball as well. Steve, good to get on, ask those burning questions. I don't know about you, but we're getting close, and I'm just excited for White Sox baseball to be back in my life.
Oh my God, dude! Look, 6 days from now, we're gonna be sitting here. There's gonna be a game on the television right now that we're actually going to be able to watch, and people are going to be able to freak out about some little minute detail, whether it's Dylan Cease or Ronaldo Lopez or somebody not having command that very first game on February 28th, and everyone's going to freak out and lose their minds. And look, I'm here for it. I need that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I can't wait for the kind of little petty stuff like that. It's stuff that, as the season wears on, Steve, I think that can kind of drive you nuts a little bit today. But as soon as the off season rolls through, and you don't have that for however many months off season is, then it's like, well, I miss it.
It really is. It's like that absence makes the heart grow fonder, as the saying goes here. And look, we've been without baseball every day in our lives with the White Sox for, it's been almost, 5 months now at this point here. I mean, they were eliminated on October 1st by the A's. So it's time, and it's going to be good to kind of have that back as part of our daily rhythm and daily routine again, even though, because once again, the White Sox flagship television home is only broadcasting 6 spring training games this year. I mean, look, they got to get those pivotal reruns of the Heartland Poker Tour and Missouri Valley, women's basketball games. Look, those are huge ratings draws, so we got to take advantage of that. We certainly don't want to overextend our product here with a baseball team that people really want to see right now.
Oh, Steve, I know
too soon.
What really grinds my gears here, that all those not being on. At least there will be some webcasts and whatnot. So, it'll be interesting. Steve, there's a couple, kind of generic topics, or I guess more general, as we're rolling through. I'm kind of excited to hear Len Casper on the radio call, so there'll be a little bit of that too going on this season. I would imagine he'll make some TV booth appearances as well.
Yeah, and look, for someone like me that I spend a lot of time in my car, just on a day-to-day aspect with my job, and there are plenty of times where I have to listen to the games in the afternoon during the week in my car on the radio. So to be able to hear Len in there, and this is a guy that's just another good, competent professional broadcaster. It's really going to add, I think, a unique element to the radio booth that hasn't been there for quite a while. And I know a lot of people were very critical of Ed Farmer over the last couple of years here, but if you really go back and look at his time when he was the color guy, when he was paired with John Rooney, obviously you look at the '05 run here, but even leading up to that, Ed Farmer did a solid job as the color guy when he had a professional broadcaster sitting next to him. I think he was just ultimately put into a spot that wasn't best suited for his overall skill set there. And again, just with having Len there being in that chair, I actually think it's going to help make DJ a little bit better. And I know DJ's obviously been a little bit of a whipping boy for, going on almost 2 decades now, since the time he's been from being in the TV booth with Hawk to now being in the radio booth here. He's been paired with some really strong-willed personalities over time. And I think now he's really going to just be in a position to just kind of let the natural flow and the natural rhythm of the game kind of take place, and being able to work off of a professional broadcaster in Len Casper. And it's going to be interesting to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Good points all around. I like Len Casper's approach too, that, he's wanted to be a radio guy since, in his introductory press conference at the White Sox, he was talking about that being a childhood dream, being able to fulfill it, something special, in his heart about radio. So I think he'll do a really good job there. It'd be fun to hear the little more inflection, excitement in his voice instead of having to muffle it, obviously, when he was on the other side of town calling games on the TV. So looking forward to all that. And one last topic I wanted to get on, because you've been a big fan of this so far, and you've noted it in several group conversations that we've had that are private chats and whatnot, but airing it out for some listeners here, just elaborate a little bit on how much you like the coaching staff that the White Sox have put together here.
I was so unbelievably concerned when the Tony La Russa hire was made that he was just going to go and kind of get the good old boys club, back together. I thought for sure Dave Duncan was going to come out of retirement to serve as the pitching coach, and he was just going to get Jose Oquendo and a lot of guys that were with him in St. Louis and in the latter stages of his time there in Oakland. But they've really assembled, I think, a very sharp, analytical, forward-thinking, modern staff. When you look at guys like Ethan Katz on there, Miguel Cairo, who was someone that wasn't on my radar as a bench coach, a guy that really has, if you look at his background, has a really nice background, and a lot of people in and around the game of baseball have just overwhelmingly positive things to say about him. Then you look at Shelley Duncan and just some of the other people that they've brought in on the coaching and the analytics side of it here. So, it really looks as though he's trying to infuse new modern ideas that are being a little more pervasive in the game, but also blending it with some of his old approach that he obviously had success with. And look, I've said this, and I think there are a lot of people out there that have been overstating the point that, the game has passed Tony La Russa by. And I think that's a bunch of bullshit, if I'm being completely honest with you. I think there are certainly aspects of this hire that you can be concerned about, but this guy has been an extremely accomplished, successful major league manager. He's not going to forget how to operate the dugout on a nightly basis there. It's just some of the little nuances and some of the little tweaks to things that have changed within the last 10 years since he was last in the dugout. But the guys that he's brought in are people that are seemingly very well versed in a lot of those changes that have taken place within the game here. So I'm really interested to see the dynamics with this staff, and I'm really excited for it. And I'm telling you, man, I'm jacked up. I'm ready to go.
I do, man. It's awesome. I'm glad that we're talking about this. We're less than a week away from actual baseball being played. Obviously, it doesn't count towards the standings, but still, it'll be there. It'll be happening, and it'll be the White Sox team. At least parts of it, along with non-roster invitees as we go into this. One name that you didn't mention there, Jerry Nairn. Kind of like that ad too as a catching instructor. That's a good one. I think it's a little bit forgotten because it's a little bit later, and it's like an instructor, major league instructor role, not an actual, like Miguel Cairo's the bench coach, Ethan Katz the pitching coach. So that's all, the big role names, but I think that could be helpful. And especially, you got a guy like Jonathan Lucroy, not saying he's for sure going to make the team or whatever, but at least it's adding a little bit of something there in the catching room. And both of those guys were together in Boston, even if it was just for a short time last year. So looking forward to it. My other thing was that, getting back to doing these more frequently. We'll actually have, it's great having guests like Dan on and stuff. But once again, those are projections. It's not stuff that is, exactly tangible of what has happened. We'll be able to break that down, react to news, notes, analysis, all of that good stuff. So I couldn't be more excited. You got any final thoughts before we sign off?
Just final thoughts, I think kind of putting a bow on all the projection talk and everything. I think bringing in a guy like Dan to kind of explain how Zips comes to its conclusions. And, Dan is someone that is very down to earth, and for anybody that follows him, he's a huge wrestling guy. He still plays the WWE video games, and he'll do these mashups where he will actually do creative players with existing guys in MLB, utilizing them in the WWE video games. But just the way he's able to kind of take the information that he utilizes for his system and make it relatable for the common fan. And the fact of the matter is, look, there's a lot of baseball fans that really just don't want that data. They don't want that information, and that's okay. But for those people that maybe are trying to start venturing into some of the more analytical aspects of the game of baseball here, a guy like Dan to kind of just make things very relatable, I think is very helpful in kind of bridging that divide that exists out there between baseball fans today.
I agree. If you're not familiar with it, you see all these numbers and you might not know what the hell it means. But you get someone on who actually, works in, developing these things and putting these things out and organizing them. It puts a face to the, in front of the numbers, so to say. And it also, at least you can explain, okay, well, here's why they don't like this guy. Oh, here's why they're really high on this guy, or, here's why they're just going to middle out, or whatever it is. I think it's valuable, important, and I'm glad we were able to get him on for a second straight year. It was good to do that before last year, and obviously we're talking about a few different names there. Some of the same returning ones this year, obviously, with core guys and a few new additions like Liam Hendricks and whatnot, but getting some of these rookies, guys, that's why I wanted to ask, too, about the bullpen there. And obviously Hendricks is a big one, but, guys like Hewer, Crochet, Foster, all them. So interesting to hear his projections and his commentary on that as well. So
and even just to hear him say that, when we were talking about Yohan Moncada and what he was dealing with from the COVID perspective last year, just for him to say, honestly, there's a lot of guesswork being involved in this because we just simply don't know. It's refreshing to actually hear him say that and kind of put himself out there from the standpoint of, look, there's a chance that his projections, that the projection system could be way off on Moncada. Yeah. We just simply don't know. And there's no way really to kind of account for what players like him went through last season and how it's going to impact them going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's just from, like you said, the production aspect of the numbers of what they're going to be, and then also just how he's feeling day to day. Like a computer can't project that. So good to hear him, reassure that that's, all stuff that goes into consideration with the Zips projections that they do over at FanGraphs. So I'm about finished with everything I got here. Any final burning things you need to get off before we go and sign out?
No, let's just get to Sunday, man.
Absolutely. Get us to Sunday. All right. Once again, thank you for tuning into Sox on Tap. You can go and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sox on Tap. All of our individual panelist handles are in the handy banner at the bottom here. Go and follow us there. Like the Facebook page, follow us on YouTube, and you can get more of these live broadcasts. It'll be nice to start doing these more frequently. And also in podcast version, this will also be uploaded and found on all your favorite platforms. So please go subscribe, rate, and review, and you'll get them right in your queue whenever these drop on those platforms. So, Steve, let's send it out. White Sox forever.
White Sox for life.